Onassis Foundation. Dublab.
Welcome to the Quarantine Tapes, a daily podcast from Onassis LA and Dublab. Hosted by Paul Holdengräber, this series chronicles shifting paradigms in the era of social distancing.
Hello.
Hello, could I please speak with Meredith Monk?
This is she.
Meredith, what a pleasure to have you on the line. Thank you so much for taking...
It is my pleasure, Paul. It's my pleasure.
Well, it's my pleasure too. Thank you for being part of the Quarantine Tapes. I really wanted your voice to be part of it. Tell me, what has your day been like today, and where do I find you?
I'm in my loft in New York City, and I've been here for the last 2.5 months. I've been pretty much alone. I mean, I live alone here, and I've only gone out about 5 times in the last 2.5 months. And my day is my usual day where I meditate in the morning, and then I was working on some music that I'm just completing one section of a new piece called Indra's Net. And then I read a little bit, and then I talked to Christian, your assistant, and here I am.
And are there some rituals you're following now that might be new for this period, for this quarantine moment?
Not necessarily new, but, it feels very much like I'm in a retreat mode, which is something that I always associated with being out of New York. When I'm in New York, usually I'm doing a lot of rehearsing with my group, which I haven't been able to do. I'm on tour a lot. I do a lot of things like interviews or teaching, something like that. Whereas if I'm in New Mexico where I have some land, I usually am, and a little bit my reality is like it is now where I have, the time is not that scheduled, so I have to rely on my discipline to work and to meditate. So that's kind of what I've been doing this 2.5 months. And it's a strange thing because on one level I'm, just overwhelmed by sadness. I just feel this wave of sadness coming over me about the suffering that's going on right now. And yet, on the other hand, it's a kind of blessing for me because I've really been able to work on my new piece in a way that I haven't been able to for a while, uninterrupted. So the music is just flowing out of me, and I'm just so grateful. It's amazing. So that is, what my days are usually like. But I have been, some of the things that I do that I think are very helpful that I've never done before is that one of the things is on Saturdays and Tuesdays, I try no screens, no radio, nothing coming in at all. Like it's like a screenless Sabbath day, or a retreat day.
Why Saturday and Tuesday?
I don't know.
I love the fact that in a way it responds perfectly to my question about rituals. You've chosen 2 days. Speaking with Pico Iyer not very long ago, also on the quarantine.
Oh, I love Pico. He's such a good friend.
I would imagine, and Pico said about I asked him about reading the newspaper, and he said, I do 5 minutes a day or less.
Of reading the newspaper?
Yeah, 5 minutes a day or less. And you've chosen 2 days where you detox from the screen, which has become so prevalent now.
The screen and the radio, because I just get, I get so involved with the news and then it affects me for the rest of the day. So I've been finding that that's unbelievable for me. It's especially in New York. I mean, when I'm in the country, I don't listen to the radio, but in New York, it's very, very noisy. So, sound is coming in from the street really loud. And so the radio is a little bit like canceling it out. It's like, and their friends on the radio, they become your friends. But usually in the country, I don't have a radio. And so this is a little bit like trying to maintain that. And those days, I also really give myself in the morning to read and to do a crossword puzzle, really meditate, do some Dharma reading, and really have that quiet morning time. And then another ritual that I've been trying to do, which is definitely coming from my Buddhist teacher, Pema Chodron, is to do what she calls a pause practice, which is that you basically just a few times in your day, you just literally stop and you take 3 deep breaths in and out. And it's amazing how you just see things that you're not noticing at all. You're hearing things that you don't notice. It's like your whole sensory apparatus opens up. And I realized just how much we all miss with our minds going so fast all the time, and the kind of conversation that our minds make with us. So when the pause practice, that all just stops, and you just are more aware of what's actually there.
You mentioned, Meredith, that in New York you live alone, but I'm wondering, do you still have the company of your turtle?
I do.
Neutron.
I have the company of my turtle, Neutron.
And what has Neutron actually taught you? I love that laugh. I love that laugh.
Well, I'm sorry that on the radio or on the tape I cannot show you Neutron. I can't introduce her to you. And since she doesn't make any noise, there's no way that you can perceive her. But, I've had her for it's like 42 years now. It will be 42 years in November.
It's a long marriage.
It's a long marriage. And I don't know how old she was when I got her, but the vet says that she's middle-aged now. She's a middle-aged tortoise.
I asked you a question about what you learned from her, and it reminded me, I'm a quotomaniac by profession, and there's a line of Graham Greene I've always loved, where he says, there's a virtue to slowness, which we have lost.
Exactly. I feel that this slowing down is really good for our nervous systems in this time. And, I think a lot about how this new world is going to be created, when and if this situation changes. There isn't really a normal, because normal was destruction of the planet, and the myth of control. I think that hopefully a new normal will be, a world that it affirms kindness and cooperation and generosity rather than cruelty, selfishness, and violence.
How hopeful are you?
Well, I think there are a lot of people that are definitely thinking in these terms. And I think, the way that I feel about it is I always say when you're doing something that you love, you don't know what the effect of that's going to be, but you are sending that out. And, we all have to work on ourselves and be friends with ourselves before we can even know what to send out to other people. And it doesn't, we don't know what the feedback is or how that's going to influence the world. But I think we just have to have that belief that it is. And, that it resonates, that it's like throwing a stone in a pool, and it resonates maybe in ways that we don't know. But it is a big wake-up call. I think that, I think the virus is impartial, and it's kind of, I think of it as Mother Nature flexing her muscles after what we've done to her. And she's not finished yet. This is like just the tip of the iceberg. So, it's really, it's a chance for us to change course. What can one do? I mean, one can only hope that people will come to their senses.
And when you say come to their senses, I think I hear really their senses. Learning
and really their senses, yes.
But in a way, I mean, we'll get to that, Meredith, but in a way it is about the senses. It is about paying attention. Attention must be paid, as Arthur Miller says. It must be paid. Attention must be paid. We must learn how to listen. And I'm going to bring up a line that I so much like. A few years ago you said, I realized I'm a doer, a person who does. But now I'm trying to be. So I often just sit and listen, kind of like a dog. And that,
Yeah.
that brought to my mind, Meredith, something that I have to read to you. Early on in my life, I read the letters of Rainer Maria Rilke, not just the letters
Oh, those are so beautiful to the young artist.
Yeah, not just the
Right,
letters
that's
to a
what-
young poet, but his letters,
poet, yeah.
his letters generally speaking, and I often say that they are part of my sentimental education. In 1907, Rilke goes and sees an exhibition, the first exhibition at the Salon d'Automne of Cézanne. And he goes with a painter friend of his, and this is what she says and what he relays. He says, Cézanne sat there in front of the paintings like a dog, just looking without any nervousness, without any ulterior motive. He only made what he knew, nothing else. And this somehow, I feel this might echo with what you said when you said do, be.
Yeah. I wish that I was a little less awkward, like do, and be. But, I'm a musician, so probably I had to do the repeat,
Yeah.
the repeat of those two words. But, I think we're not trained to not fill up space. We're trained to always fill it up in one way or another. So either that's achieving or it's, watching movies or some kind of activity. And it's very hard here in the city. I do find like when I'm in New Mexico, which is my soul place, I'm just amazed. I mean, I can sit and just look and listen for a long time. And I always call it the cosmic orchestra. It's like, why did that bird just start right there? The conductor brought the bird in, and now over there are the crickets, and it's sort of the rhythm of nature. The inherent rhythms of nature are so beautiful and so elegant. So it always inspires me not to try to imitate it in any way, not to imitate those sounds, but just the kind of inevitability of the rhythms.
Just sit there and as I read, you once sat there and got quite close to coyotes.
Oh yes, one time when I first went out there, so it's northern New Mexico, there were coyotes, a bunch of them in this valley. Ooh, it was really primal. I mean, it was kind of terrifying on a certain level and so beautiful. The power. So it was two groups, and they would be calling across the canyon. So, and usually it was at night. And so one afternoon I didn't know the land very well at that time. So, I was just seeing how I felt about it and, like just getting familiar with it. And I went up, I think it was maybe about 1:00 in the afternoon, and I climbed up. We have cliffs on the land. And I climbed up and I started singing a piece called Offering, which is a very high, sustained kind of melody. And they answered me. My coyote singer sisters answered me in the middle of the day. I probably woke them up from their siesta, but that was so extraordinary. So that was an interspecies duet.
Well, you've said that you want your work to be of benefit to sentient beings.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. What do you mean by that?
Well, again, it's a Buddhist concept, and it is a way of us to remember that every little creature and every living thing is sacred, and not in a very straightforward kind of way. In that way of thinking about things, everything that's alive is sentient, including a mosquito or, So it's not that, the Dalai Lama himself would say, if you have these mice that are going to make disease in your house, you have to, be kind of practical about life, and and you might have to figure out a way to do something or another about them. But you're very aware of it. There's a kind of awareness. It doesn't take anything for granted in that way of thinking about things, and that's really a great thing, because I think in our lives there's so much that we take for granted.
Someone who comes to mind when thinking about you quite naturally, and I think probably naturally to you, is John Cage. So many things that John Cage said seem to me so consonant with what I take to be your way of being and thinking and listening in the world, including his statement that the act of listening is in fact an act of composing. But there's this little. Tell me, you said I want you to respond then before I go on.
Well, I knew John at the end of his life because I sang his piece called Aria, and I sang another piece, Variations 6, I think it was. And I didn't know him early on. And, I think anybody that was alive in the mid-60s and early 70s, I mean, there was not a way that you could not be at least influenced by his thinking in one way or another, even if you were responding to it in kind of Hegelian dialectic. I mean, I don't think my work was really ever that influenced by John. It's a very different way of working, but I loved him as a person, and we had so much fun together. And I always learned by just being with him as a human being. And so I find as I get older, I'm starting to understand his way of thinking about life more. It's not so much in my art. My art is I work in a different way. But, what an amazing, amazing person. And then in 2012, the MTT, Michael Tilson Thomas and the San Francisco Symphony asked me to be in a production that was directed by Yuval Sharon, my good friend. That's how I met him, of John Cage's songbooks. And I sang along with Jesse Norman and Joan LaBarbera and with members of the orchestra and with Michael.
Goodness.
And so that was a wonderful way of also making contact with John after he died. But when he was alive, I saw him near, about a month before he died. And he was always really encouraging to me in my singing. He really always, was very kind and was very encouraging to me.
There's this anecdote which I love. It's more than an anecdote. It's something that John Cage said to the painter Philip Guston. John Cage said to the painter Philip Guston, "When you start working, everybody's in your studio. The past, your friends, enemies, the art world, and above all, your own ideas. All are there. But as you continue painting, they start leaving one by one, and you are left completely alone. Then, if you're lucky, even you leave."
I understand that. I really understand that.
I imagine.
And I think that comes from long years of working. I really do. I understand exactly what he's talking about there, because I do experience the feeling of that. I really experience somehow this mystery of getting out of the way enough that something from, I don't know how you would term it, like a larger intelligence can come through you. I really have that feeling sometimes these days. And I think it comes more after you've been working for a long, long time. And
in a certain way, right?
And in a certain way. And, John did say, I remember him saying to me one time, towards the end of his life, he said, one can have too many ideas. and I remember as a young person, I had so many ideas. That was ideas. And I remember thinking about that. And it's true that starts falling away as you get older, and you're just working with it itself. You're working with the material itself. It starts to hone, you start honing down to what's really essential and to the bone. And I'm not sure that all artists, I'm not sure that's the trajectory of all artists' lives, but it is mine.
And nor need it be, but you claim it and embody it.
What was the word before you said you claim it and embody it?
No, it doesn't need to be the mission of all artists, but it is yours. Yeah. It is yours, Meredith, and you claim it and you embody it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. The claiming it is more maybe having a gratitude for it. It's more being aware of that process. And it's not to say that one, I always say, well, when you don't have moments of inspiration, you have to be a good shoemaker. So you have to keep your craft up, and you have to, I vocalize every day, keeping my voice together and keeping my body together and all those things that are, keeping the instrument going. But, I feel that by doing that, then you're open to those moments of inspiration.
I remember the Emily Dickinson said that the soul must remain ajar. We have to remain, we have to remain
That's
open,
beautiful.
Isn't it?
Yes. Yes, that's beautiful.
Meredith, have you been having a lot of dreams lately? And are you paying attention to them?
Not so many dreams. I have a little dream journal. I have since I was in my 20s, and so I write them down. Not as many dreams as I would think I would have in a time like this. And also, I've always throughout my whole life been not exactly an insomniac, but I have not had an easy time sleeping. That was not one of my strong points. And strangely enough...
Likewise, alas.
Yeah, and strangely enough, in this time, I've been sleeping quite well. And relatively speaking, I go to bed late and I get up late. So that's been working for me. And I think something about not having the pressure of morning appointments is helping me. But I'm just amazed, and I'm so grateful that I'm sleeping. How are you doing during this time?
I keep the night company.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's a good way of saying it. Or the night keeps you company.
Likewise, we have a relationship which is a bit too close. Because when you sleep, Meredith, what happens is you make the night disappear. When you're awake, the night is with you.
That's right. And do you take a nap in the day to compensate for that, or do you feel like your energy flows through the whole day?
I wish I did take a nap. Maybe after our call today, I'll do that. Thinking that it would be a good thing for me. Meredith,
what are your days like, Paul? Are you doing ritual? Are you alone?
I'm here at the Ola house, at the Onassis house, which you've been at very much at the beginning of this adventure. I'm here on my own throughout the day, basically from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Really working on these quarantine tapes and trying to figure out, what are people thinking about during this time? What and also this whole notion that you and I were speaking about and that you brought up so beautifully, which is, what will it be like, Meredith, to go back to what passes for normal life?
Well, I worry about it, because I feel that what we're missing in the society, and it was just going more. I feel like in a strange way, this pandemic is just an extension and an extreme of what was going on before, the impulses, because I've been worried so long about the lack of touch in our world, because of the screens, the devices, some kind of, what would I say, longing for virtual reality. Well, I think it's hard enough to be in reality. And so I just don't quite understand that. Like, why do we have to have virtual reality devices when just being attentive to reality is really challenging? So I worry for the young ones, that have grown up with those screens and that addiction. I mean, those devices are really addictive, and they're made to be addictive. And so I feel like what we're going through now, if this is just going to be what our life is going to be, then some of my fears of the future are, going to come true. Or, I don't want to say fears. Fear is a little extreme, but worry about it, about young people. And for example, I've been teaching at Harvard. We finished the beginning of May, and from the middle of March on, they closed the school, and we had to figure out a way to teach online. And I had a composition class, music composition class, and interdisciplinary composition class, and that I could figure out some ways of really working with that technology. I could give them assignments that they could do at home, and then they could show them. And I had students from all over the world. One went home to Italy, one went home to Serbia. I mean, it was in some ways really interesting, and it was really interesting to see their homes and their dogs and cats and And, I mean, that was great. And so that class, I mean, and I gave assignments every week, like a kind of study that they could do at home, and they came up with wonderful things, and I think it was exciting for them. But the other class was choral music, and we were teaching them a suite of Atlas Act 3 to do a concert with Katie Geisinger and Alison Sniffen, and I, we're like a trio, and Katie Geisinger was teaching with me, and she's wonderful at teaching choral music. She really knows how to analyze it and really help the singers figure out how to do it, this way of singing. And wow, we could not sing together. On Zoom, there are delays, and so we could never sing a piece together because it's so utterly frustrating. You can't keep a rhythm at the same time. You can't sing in unison. So I had to figure out all these assignments where we'd work with each of them as solo voices or passing on a melody, or, you could never do anything additive. It was very linear. And then I realized, wow, this is really hard for these young ones. They're never going to get a chance to do this concert. So I figured out to do, I started thinking about doing a virtual choir Zoom piece. And what that is that there's like Alison Sniffen laid down a track of the organ. It was a short piece from Book of Days, my film Book of Days, called Fields Clouds. So Alison played the organ continuity, like the organ track, and then each of them received it, and then they could, record over that their individual parts. And in the class sessions, we would hear them sing as soloists, so we could give them, corrections and modifications, and that was great on a certain level. But they never sang that piece together. They never had the joy of singing it together. I mean, choral music, there is nothing more joyful than singing with other people. So there they were alone at home, singing their individual parts, and then we edited them. So how is it going to be if we're living in a world where we can't make music together anymore? I mean, really together, live together. And the other part of this has to do with my sincere belief in the power of live performance, because I do feel that there's a kind of energy exchange, there's a vulnerability, and communal experience, a common experience that you cannot substitute with something on the screen. It's about touch. That, I think, I do a lot of thinking about that, how are we going to make music?
Well, it's about touch, and it's really about touch. Again, we're back to this notion of the senses. It's about being but when we talk about being moved by something, we talk about being touched.
That's right.
And so this sensory deprivation that we're experiencing now because of what we need to do, and the screens that substitute for what passes for reality, is really complicated. Meredith, I can't tell you how much I've enjoyed speaking to you, and my only chagrin here at this present moment is a brevity of time. But for the moment, I send you a virtual hug, and I can't wait to see you and hope that our paths cross soon again and in person.
Me too, Paul.
And maybe someday we can sing together.
That would be so wonderful. And my message to everybody that's listening is, please do something that you love now. Please use your time doing something that you love. It doesn't matter what it is, but if it comes out of love, it's a good thing to be working on right now.
Wonderful. What a great message to leave. And now I'm going to lie down and close my eyes for a few moments.
Good. Thank you, Paul.
A huge hug. Bye-bye, Meredith.
A huge hug. Bye, Paul. Bye.
To support this show and Dublab's progressive programming, go to dublab.com/support.